Good people, good people, good people, good people, good people, good people. Welcome to the latest episode of Jonathan Thinks. I am your host, Jonathan Collins. I have a few things on my mind, and who knows, maybe, just maybe, you've been thinking about those things too. First off, welcome back to me. If you follow the show, I've been on a little bit of a hiatus. It's summertime. Your boy not even outside, actually just been a lot of family time, hanging out with my daughters, my wife, my family, kicking it, spent some time in Rhode Island, back in the city now, kind of getting back to the normal rhythm. But hey, got to enjoy the summer, got to hit the beach, got to have some seafood, love seafood, especially in New England. If you can grab a nice lobster roll, like clam roll, fish and chips, that's my absolute bag. But I'm excited to be back, and I miss you guys. So thank you to all the folks who have been rocking with me and with the content. Again, if you're watching on YouTube, please like, comment, subscribe, share, hype your boy up. Like, come on, like help this community grow. And speaking of things growing, the first thing on my mind is the Democratic-Socialists of America, right? So DSA has really dominated a lot of the political discourse lately, because there are folks who are very excited about DSA and these progressive policies, and especially just this political block of folks who tend to be younger, tend to be of color, more diverse, and they are going super, 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 super hard for Palestine and against Israel. And so that's where this is really shaping out as almost kind of a litmus test on how you feel about the politics of the Western Bank of Gaza. And so there's the people who are down for DSA and all about this new kind of radical political movement. And then there are the folks who are more establishment, who are looking at this as a threat to the Democratic Party and its ability to regain power after a very crushing defeat in 2024 against Donald Trump. And I want to come at this topic in a couple of different ways for a couple of different reasons. So one, let's talk about what just happened recently. So we just had a string of state and congressional elections in a few very key states. So we had Missouri, Washington, Virginia, and the big one was Michigan. And these are all states where there were congressional primaries. So folks who were running for the House of Representatives, the lower house in Congress. And then there were also some state legislature party primaries as well. So these are people who are running for basically the Congress of the state, for the state legislature, whether it's the lower house, the house of the state legislature, or the Senate, the upper house of the state legislature. So this is all about state politics and federal politics, but especially how it's playing out in a few very critical states. Michigan and Virginia are both states that we consider to be pretty big swing states. In fact, if you look at Michigan, they've been swinging back and forth for the last 3 election cycles. Donald Trump actually carried Michigan in 2016. Joe Biden carried Michigan in 2020. And then Donald Trump carries Michigan again in 2024. And the success of Donald Trump in the state of Michigan has created this narrative that Michigan is not interested in progressive politics. And then the results from last night enter the chat. And you look at Abdul Ed Said and his movement. This is not a democratic socialist technically. He doesn't technically identify as a democratic socialist. He identifies as a progressive economic populist, but he very much kind of hangs in that camp. And he's also embracing a politics of Gen Z, millennial politics. He was partying with streamers at his election watch party. He had, Hassan Piker was there, and he's had some very young lefty people who have been, kind of putting their arms around him and supporting his campaign and creating almost the political image of him. And for this dude to be successful in Michigan, a place that's gone for Donald Trump 2 out of the last 3 presidential elections, that says something, right? That says that there is an appetite for progressive politics, even in the states where Donald Trump has been electorally successful. But it also says, before we get too concerned about what these primary elections mean for the Democratic Party, let's see how these Democratic Socialist candidates mobilize Democratic voters when they're competing against Republicans. Because the interesting thing about this kind of like progressive socialist movement that's happening on the left is everybody keeps saying that it's going to fail. And at every step, they continue to prove people wrong, right? And it's because they finally found the way to create an idea of democratic, left-leaning, socialist politics that's not what you tend to think about when you think about socialist politics. So what is socialism? Socialism is basically the idea of government controlling economic industry. So what we live in right now is a capitalist society, and capitalism is grounded in private ownership. In a capitalist society, it's all about entrepreneurs and people starting their own businesses becoming corporations. And if you own the intellectual property of your corporation, then you have the right to the profits generated by said corporation, by said company. And those who work for that company are only entitled to the wages that they agree to be paid by working for your company. So this is how you have situations where people are making $15, $20 an hour, $30,000, $40,000 a year for companies that are making millions and millions of dollars in profit every year. Think about like a Walmart, for example, or think about I know who to pick on. Target. Think about a Target, right? Where workers are barely able to afford basic cost of living amenities, and the owners of said corporations are literally bringing in millions of dollars and being able to buy yachts. That's the worst version of capitalism that you get, right? Socialism is about ownership over the means of production. And so it's about companies being publicly owned. So instead of a corporation being owned by a person, it's publicly owned. It's owned by the workers, and the profits that are generated by the company are shared by the workers. And so what you tend to have seen previously when politicians in the US take more socialist oriented approaches, you tend to see a focus on a social safety net. Socialism was about government creating the conditions for addressing poverty. And when people are exploited by and fall out of the labor force as a result of the greed of capitalism. This new version of socialism that is being pushed by folks like Zoran Mamdani, Daria Lisa Abilia Chevelar, Cory Bush, Jamal Bowman, right? So AOC, this brand of socialism that is being put at the forefront now is about workers. It's about ensuring that workers have access to a certain quality of life. It's about taxing the rich and reducing the ridiculous amount of profit and wealth that's generated and essentially just concentrated amongst the top 1%. And what democratic socialists are doing now is saying, hey, look, we want policies that fight for workers, that get folks into the labor force, that create the conditions for everybody to have a fair wage and to have the safety net in place when they fall on hard times. And we want to use this excess wealth generated by people who are not doing the work, because notice they're very strategic when they talk about workers and working people, and they want to redistribute that money from the wealthy to the working people. All right. Now, what's really interesting to me about this is that a few years ago, when I was in graduate school, when I was finishing up, so I got my PhD in 2017. And as I was finishing up, I was working on this paper. It was not related to my dissertation. My dissertation was about school board governance. So if you want to talk school board stuff, we can talk school board stuff too. Of course, my primary research interest is that and deliberative democracy, democratic deliberation. That's my jam. But I'm a political scientist, so I'm interested in other aspects of politics as well. And one of the things I was interested in was the Bernie Sanders campaign in 2016. And so I wrote this paper based off of this finding that I had from some survey data. And in the survey data, I found that the strongest predictor of whether Democrats, people who identified as Democrats, voted for third-party candidates in 2016 in that general presidential election between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, the folks who voted third-party, the strongest predictor of whether they did so was whether or not they had a strong favorability rating of Bernie Sanders. So if you like Bernie Sanders and you're a Democrat, in 2016, you were less likely to vote for Hillary Clinton. Not rocket science here. But what was particularly interesting is the assumption was that this finding was basically just picking up on Bernie bros. And these were basically the stereotype of the white guy who is kind of libertarian, but critiques the system, mad at the establishment. But it was in no way seen as, and Bernie's campaign was treated as, Bernie's campaign was treated as very homogenous, or it was basically treated as only white people were supporting Bernie Sanders. This was not a multiracial coalition that was interested in Bernie Sanders' policies and all the tax the rich and broadening the social safety net stuff. Well, in my paper, I found evidence that that was not true, that actually it was young folks of color where that Bernie effect of not wanting to support Hillary in the general election, that's where it was more concentrated. It was amongst young, millennials of color were the ones who were saying, I was rocking with Bernie. I'm not rocking with Hillary. So I sent this paper to one academic journal, rejected. Another academic journal, rejected. Another academic journal, rejected. And I kept getting these reviewers that just would not believe the findings in the data. And it just shows you that social scientists also have biases. And when what we see in the data doesn't confirm our biases, we can reject them. Because that paper still to this day has not been published. And every time I sent it out for review, I kept getting this pushback that this can't be right. Well, you fast forward now, and I look at Abdul El Said. I look at William Lawrence, also in Michigan. I look at Donovan McKinney, also in Michigan. And I look at, she didn't win, but the fact that she even had enough momentum to try again, Cori Bush in Missouri. Candidates of color, millennials running as far left candidates that are basically following this lineage of Bernie Sanders. And so what I'm here to tell you is that sleep on this democratic socialist progressive movement if you want, but this has been building. And you want to know how we know that the Democratic Party establishment is concerned about this? One story that kind of snuck out into the news media, into the public sphere, didn't get a lot of traction. I talked about it on the KBLA More Perfect Union. Shout out to Nicola Corte, the host who has me on every other week. But when we talked about this story, the Democratic Party has decided to move or rearrange the schedule of the presidential primary, moving South Carolina to be the first state. And a lot of people were excited about this because it means that Black voters can have more of an influence on the agenda for the Democratic Party. That was one of my takes. I think that's right. But what it also means is that I think the Democratic Party establishment is trying its best to limit this surge that's coming from these far left progressives. Because if you remember, in 2016, when Hillary Clinton was going up against Bernie Sanders, the first four states, the first four primaries in February of 2016, Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina. Only one of those states did Hillary Clinton carry decisively. You guessed it, South Carolina. Iowa, Hillary Clinton wins by 0.2% of the vote. She loses New Hampshire by a lot. She wins Nevada by about 5 points. Meaningful, but not overwhelming. But then she blows Bernie Sanders out of the water by 50 points in South Carolina. If it weren't for Hillary Clinton showing in South Carolina in 2016, Bernie Sanders would have had so much more momentum going into Super Tuesday. And with that momentum, who knows what happens, right? 2020, same thing happens. But actually, it's even spookier for the Democratic Party establishment. Of the first four states in the 2020 presidential primary, Bernie Sanders wins 3 out of the 4. Which one is the only state that Joe Biden carries among the first 4? You guessed it, South Carolina. Bernie Sanders wins Iowa. He wins New Hampshire. He even wins Nevada and wins Nevada pretty decisively. It's South Carolina that again comes through and saves the day for moderate centrist Democrats. So the establishment is concerned, and kind of for good reason, because this is not lightning in a bottle. This is not new. This is not a recent development. This has been building up for 10 years now. So sleep on the democratic socialists and the progressives of the left if you want. The data trends are very clear. They are not going anywhere. They are here to stay. And they found a populist message around supporting working people at a time where everything's expensive, where everything costs so much, where nobody can afford to do anything. And when we're now in wars that we didn't want to be in, and their messages are resonating more and more. Democratic Party establishment, if you're not truly afraid, you probably should be. Speaking of things that we probably should be afraid of, I'm also thinking about Kamala Harris and her recent remarks at the National Urban League event. I'll play a little bit of a clip for you.
Think about this Calais decision and the effective gutting of the Voting Rights Act through Shelby and Calais. How do we best respond? You're a brilliant lawyer, been a legislator and an executive. How do we best respond to what is really a setback in terms of a tool that we've used to protect our voting rights? How do we best respond?
Okay, real talk?
Real talk, straight talk.
I honestly don't believe that it will be any time soon that we are going to revive the Voting Rights Act. So I don't believe that it is going to be the best use of our energy right now to try to get that done, because I don't know that it's going to get done right now.
This was tough. She was getting killed on the internet for this, on X. Actually, one of my homies from graduate school, Naveed, had a banger that went viral. He called it the "I Don't Have a Dream" speech. Shout out to Naveed. And admittedly, this was uninspiring. So let's get into it. I understand what Kamala Harris is trying to say here, that if you are purely thinking about the Voting Rights Act as a legislative issue from a whipping the vote, do we have the numbers in Congress type of standpoint? And do we have a Supreme Court in place that would create the legal conditions also for something to happen here? Then pushing for a reauthorization and a bolstering of the Voting Rights Act seems pointless. I get what she's trying to say. But it don't feel good hearing you say it. And not only does it not feel good hearing you say it, I don't completely buy it. I don't think that that's all the way true. One, again, Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris is an actual lawyer, has been to law school, has practiced law, knows the law. I am a political science professor. I am not a lawyer. I have not been to law school. I have a PhD in political science. That is my credential. That is my background. I'm not going to Cheyenne Bryant you out here, right? Sorry for the shade. Didn't help it. But my understanding of what happened with the Supreme Court striking down the Voting Rights Act, or Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act through the Calais case, is, one, they didn't completely eliminate Section 2, yet alone the Voting Rights Act. What they did is eliminate the ability to enforce Section 2 without a smoking gun. So we used to be able to look at racial disparities and say, okay, well, look, statistically, this negatively impacted Black people at a very clear, disproportionate rate, right? That whether it's, let's say, for example, a Secretary of State decides to do voter registration purges or purging voters from the voter logs. And if it's clear statistically that Black people were overrepresented in the purge, the Voting Rights Act, Section 2, creates the conditions to investigate that and overturn it, as it was previously defined. Now, the new version of Section 2 that has been stripped down and hyper-concentrated says, no, you have to prove intent. We need to know that the Secretary of State actually intended to be discriminatory when they decided to, for example, purge these voters who just so happen to mostly be Black. Where I disagree with Kamala Harris is that even in this new definition of Section 2, there's a lot of mobilizing potential here, because guess what? Now Supreme Court says that we need a smoking gun. Look at how the Republicans have been moving. They are ready to give you all the smoking guns that you need. The racial discrimination has been so overt and so easy to detect. It's been right in our faces. They have been playing in our faces. When you talk about making it illegal to teach Black history, how is that not overt discrimination? when you talk about targeting districts, only districts for redistricting where Black members of Congress or where the majority of the districts are comprised of Black voters, because I also want to look at, be mindful of Steve Cohen in Memphis, who's a white member of Congress, but he's a part of the CBC and he represents a Black district. The dismembering of Black districts. How can we say that this is not intentional? And you mean to tell me if investigations are launched, we won't find emails or text messages or some form of communication where these people are making it very clear and explicit that their intention is racial discrimination? So I don't think all hope is lost here. I also think that, yeah, sure, maybe the Voting Rights Act can't be the issue that you campaign on. But I think if you take the affordability stuff that people really care about, living in the recession, can't find a job, or jobs don't pay enough, groceries are too expensive, gas is too expensive, the economy is terrible. Oh, but by the way, you're also under attack politically. I think those compound together to make it very compelling to voters, especially Black voters. I think moving into 2028, Black voters, they don't want just to know what you're going to do for affordability and economic issues. They want to know what we're going to do to reshift the power structure, right? They want to know, how is this whole situation with Trump or a Trump-like political figure not going to happen again? And the Voting Rights Act, reinstallating that is one of the ways in which you can help ensure that that doesn't happen again. And guess what? There are probably some Republicans who feel the same way. And maybe they can't say it now because they're afraid of what might happen if they face backlash from Trump publicly. But once Trump is out of the picture and no longer able to run for the presidency again, I think you're going to see some Republicans say some things about what we need to do institutionally to keep this kind of thing from happening again as well. So I want to respectfully disagree with Vice President Harris. I think the Voting Rights Act, the restoration of it, is not only very important, but it's on the board. It's on the board. And I think any platform, any Democratic Party hopeful that doesn't include that as, I think, as a serious part of their platform is going to struggle to mobilize Black voters. I just think that that's going to be the case. The last thing that you want to do is, after Black voters have been the direct targets of discrimination by the administration, put forward a platform that basically tries to treat them like everybody else. That basically says like, oh, the issues are, the problem is just affordability and the economy. We're going to address this in a way that is good for everybody. No. That's not good enough. Black voters are going to want to know, what are you going to do to not only put money in our pockets, what are you going to do to empower us? Voting Rights Act, that ain't even getting it all the way done. That's just a start, but it needs to be a part of the platform as the start. The last thing on my mind, and I'll be really quick about this, is the Nolan Wells story. As you know, Nolan Wells, a Black teenager in Mississippi, goes on this boat excursion celebration with all white friends to Horn Island off the coast of Mississippi, uninhabited place that you can only get to by boat. And it's a parent's worst nightmare. All the friends come back and Nolan does not. And a couple of days later, they find his body near the uninhabited island, and he is no longer with us. And there's been this ongoing investigation. There's been multiple autopsies now. No one can figure out what happened. It's just this ongoing mystery. And I don't want to make any statements about what happened because that's still, to be determined. What I will say, and why this story is important and why we need to be diligent about staying focused on this and keep paying attention to it and follow the outcome, is because, this story raises a serious question that we have been asking ourselves and continue to ask ourselves, and we'll keep asking ourselves moving forward, which is, can we really live together? Can we do this? I see this story and I think of the Martin Luther King quote: "We've learned to swim the sea like fish and fly the air like birds, but we have not yet learned how to live together or mastered the art of living together." And that's what this story to me embodies. This question, can we live together? Because when we heard the story, it immediately, especially in the Black community, raised questions of, see, this is why y'all shouldn't hang out with them. This is why we shouldn't hang out with them. And it gets people talking about Mississippi and its dark history. And nothing about this story brings us together. It only brings up these old wounds that have continued to keep us separate. And so the worst case scenario for this is if the investigation reveals that Nolan Wells' death was racially motivated. Because the only way for America to become the version of itself that we need it to be is for there to be some level of racial unity. I'm not saying there needs to be cultural homogeneity. I'm not saying we all have to be the same culturally. There needs to be a lot of mutual respect across cultures. We need to acknowledge and respect Black culture while creating the conditions for folks of all races and cultures and backgrounds to be able to live together, go to public spaces, and just like live safely and have opportunity, have our families, have our communities, have our friends, and just feel safe, loved, and respected. And this Nolan Wells story, it has the potential to add a major fracture to the possibility of that happening. And so keep our eyes on this story, because if it is racially motivated, that tells us something, and we do need to do something. If it's not racially motivated, we need to be honest about that, and we need to continue to carve out and figure out the question that I think we run from too much, which is, again, what will it take? What will it look like for us to truly live together in some sort of love, harmony, unity? What will it take? What will it look like? And the answer to that question is etched in the stories of these seemingly small encounters, like a Black boy hanging out with his friends, all white friends, in a place that was the hotbed of the Confederacy and white supremacy. Can that happen? Is that possible? If it's not possible, we're just the America of old. If it is possible, then maybe we are on our way. As unbelievable as it feels at times, maybe we are on our way to a more perfect union. And that concludes this episode of Jonathan Thinks. Again, I am your host, your friendly neighborhood democracy scholar, Jonathan Collins. These were a few of my thoughts, and who knows, maybe, just maybe, you were thinking it too. Remember that every time we convene, it's an opportunity to grow. We do it with love, we do it with joy, and we do it together. Until next time, holla at y'all. Peace out.